avoidant attachment and avoidant men in particular, ultimately there's this real big fear of opening up emotionally. That's what's killing your dating life. And to get out of this unhealthy way of being, this avoidance, this pushing away love, into flourishing, thriving relationships. We're going to start with the struggles with the physical closeness. Ultimately, physical closeness is about pleasure. The pleasure of holding someone's hand, the pleasure of kissing someone. So it's this underdeveloped piece here. This is what a lot of avoidant men are really struggling with. They've never had this example of healthy pleasure, healthy connection through their parents and so forth. Next piece, overthinking everything. Overthinking. It creates stress, it creates disconnection, and they overthink in the hope that they can come to a conclusion and work everything out. Fucking newsflash, boys. Overthinking very rarely solved any problems, especially emotional ones. Our overthinking we do to avoid feeling. And that's a little clue into how to solve it. As one avoidant man to another avoidant man, that is when my avoidance started to shift. So, you match with somebody, right? You feel a spark, they're clearly interested. Then something happens, right? You start to pull away. You tell yourself that really it's not right or there's something wrong with her. You know, you get busy, you disappear. That is avoidance, right? And that's what's killing your dating life and your relationships. And I know, right? Because for years I was highly avoidant and I thought it was a strength. I thought this was how all men were, right? But in fact, what I come to realize is it was fear, and it was really getting in the way of me creating any sort of healthy, loving relationship. On another level, the polarity level, it was a very thing, when it comes down to it, was getting in the way of me embodying kind of a healthy masculine and a healthy feminine in my life. And when I started to look at the masculine and feminine principles, as well as some other bits around communication, that is when my avoidance started to shift. I'm David Chambers, and over the next 40 or 50 minutes, I am going to really break down avoidant attachment. This is something I talk about all the time across all of my channels. I run programs for avoidant men and see them get into happy, healthy relationships and see them getting into communication and openness and emotions and even getting married and having kids. Some of my clients have done that, which is really beautiful to see. But what I really see so often is this unhealthy masculine expression, right, that comes through, which I'll describe later. And there's unhealthy feminine expression that comes through as well, right? It's particularly in avoidant men, right? And this is really one of the lenses we can use to get out of this unhealthy way of being, this avoidance, this pushing away love, into flourishing, thriving relationships, right? So you're going to leave here with a clear understanding of what avoidance looks like, how it shows up in your life, your relationships, and what it looks like from a polarity point of view, what it looks like from the masculine, the unhealthy masculine, what it looks like from the unhealthy feminine. And then I'm going to jump into the various ways and things that you can do now and today, right? Start doing today, that can get you towards a sort of relationship that you want with the wonderful women that you probably meet in your life, right? Sounds like a good deal? It's a great deal, right? So where do we start? We're going to start with, we're going to define avoidance, right? And obviously, some people are going to kind of disagree on what it's, not disagree, but this is what I've seen in the many hundreds of clients I've worked with, right? The many men I've spoken to. So this is like dating and relationships, some of the ways that avoidance shows up. Ultimately, there's this real big fear of opening up emotionally, right? This fear and belief that our emotions, there is something wrong with our emotions, that we don't feel safe to open up, to share, to connect emotionally. Right? And that is one of the big things really at the core of avoidance that causes problems, because relationships, dating, it's emotional, right? We gravitate towards people we like, we gravitate towards people we want to be with, and relationships are emotional entities. If we can't be with the emotions, of a relationship, it becomes a struggle and it becomes a difficulty. And I want to say this first off, it doesn't mean that you're doomed. Right? Because I think a lot of literature when it comes to avoidance and avoidant men, avoidant attachment and avoidant men in particular is really like they're doomed, they're cruel, they're evil people. And I'm here to tell you, as an avoidant man, as one avoidant man to another avoidant man, that is not the case. I work with some beautiful men who are caring, kind, really driven, really wanting to make a difference. And they do through their own effort and energy, right? It is not a prison sentence like so many books and so many Instagram accounts make it sound, especially the ones coming from anxious people that make it sound like avoidance are all the problem and forget to talk about some of the really, the the terrible things that anxious people do, because they're not perfect either, as I see when I work with couples. So this emotional piece is a centerpiece, right? And you can argue that this emotional piece, when from polarity point of view, this emotional piece is really an unhealthy feminine, an unhealthy and undeveloped feminine energy, right? Where the self-expression is muted, the emotional capacity is shrunken, right? Never really grown. And this is what we kind of say in, the energy of emotion is really stunted, so that the feminine is low when it comes to the emotional piece, right? So another part that comes up in for avoidant attached people, men, I'm talking about men because I always talk to men, the struggles with the physical closeness, right? This is like resistance to touch, expressing emotion and, expressing attraction and desire, right? Again, this is a similar thing to the first thing I said there about emotions, which is it's like this shrunken feminine pleasure, because ultimately physical closeness is about pleasure, right? The pleasure of holding someone's hand, the pleasure of kissing someone, caressing them, so forth. So it's this underdeveloped piece here, right? When it comes to the feminine, our feminine embodiment, the expression through pleasure hasn't grown, hasn't got out of kind of even immature femininity, hasn't kind of matured into a mature, healthy feminine. And this is what a lot of men, avoidant men, are really struggling with, right? They've never had this example of kind of healthy pleasure, healthy kind of connection through their parents and so forth. Next piece, signs, avoidant attachment. Hot and cold. Yeah. 1 minute it's like, yeah, I'm on. Next minute, oh, I'm off. I want to run away, right? If this is you, I've actually got a free gift down below, which is all about how we push, why you push away love, where I go into a bit more detail about this. There's 3 videos. They're really amazing videos. Of course they are, because I made them. Around this kind of hot, cold thing. So if you want to download that and watch those videos, just dive below and hit the link. So this hot and cold is like, initially, there's this rising of feeling. There's this like, this passion, desire even, right? In a avoidant man. And then suddenly there's a fear that comes up, right? There's fear, and that fear is often about a projection into the future, right? So there's a level here of a lack of kind of what we kind of call containment, right? Boundaries with our psyche and how our mind is creating stories. So it's like this containment of like, wait a minute, that would be, hold up, this story I'm creating, this projection of what this person wants isn't actually what's happening now. Let me come back to the present, right? So there's like an underdeveloped, like healthy masculine going on here when it comes to this hot and cold dynamic. But there's also, in this play, there's emotional reactivity, right? There's a high emotional reactivity, because in this hot and cold dynamic, the avoidant man, he has some feelings, right? Fear, worry, anxiety, projection, so forth. Projection isn't a feeling, but that causes the feelings. And he emotionally reacts to that. So there's a level of like this, in this both dynamic, this kind of dysfunctional, unhealthy masculine and feminine dynamic, right? Because, and I'm going to talk about what it looks like in the healthy later on, but ideally that's not how we're responding, right? Next one is kind of this hyper independence, where we believe as avoidant men, especially because it's a double whammy, right? And the societal conditioning for men is that we should be independent. We should be lone wolves. We shouldn't need anybody. And then on top of it, we have avoidant attachment, which actually pulls us away from connection because, we feel scared. We feel we're going to be engulfed, right? So we avoid planning things. We avoid anything that would be putting things into the future. We want to keep our options open. We want to keep plans open. We want to be non-committal. We want to stay in that space of freedom, right? I want to feel free. And like, man, I feel that. Like freedom is one of the things that I love. But this, you see, this desire for freedom, this obsession to some degree with freedom and being able to choose where we live, where we go next week. If I don't fancy seeing you next week, I want to be able to do something else. Or, I want to sleep with someone else next week. I want to be able to sleep with someone else. This freedom is this unhealthy masculine, right? Where we're stuck in this kind of what I call adolescence, right? Because I think independence is this adolescent energy of like, I want to be free. Dependence is that lowest level, which is like babies and children. And even to some degree, when you get into a relationship, as I'm seeing now, as being, having a child and also having a partner, and sometimes you do become dependent on each other. And that's actually very normal and healthy. But for this explanation, dependence is like children. They're dependent on you, right? Bjorn is dependent on me. He can't do anything for himself. Like, he really can't do nothing. We have to give him food. We have to do everything, right? So he's dependent. Then you get to adolescence. You get to like 15, 16, 17, 18, early 20s. Right. And then you're independent. You can live on your own. You can do your own thing. You can go where you want. You feel powerful, right? You think you've conquered the world because you're independent and you don't need anybody. This is very much, what's his name? Andrew Tate energy, this adolescent, like, I've conquered the world. I can do what I want. Now, there's a real limit there, right? Because the next level up, which I'm going to talk about later on, right, is actually what helps us do really incredible things, build incredible businesses, like have a major impact on the world, even create amazing relationships, right? So you're going to have to stay tuned for that one. But this hyper independence is this kind of like immature masculine, right? So then we have criticism and fault finding, right? This is something that the avoidant man does. He meets a woman. All of this stuff also plays out in relationship. It just happens slightly differently in relationship. Like the hot and cold can be, they're really like close one day and then the next day they want to be really distant, but it's still within the confines of the relationship. The hyper independence can be, they are fighting for freedom within the relationship, not wanting to like agree to something in the future, or I'm looking at myself, how does it show up? Of like not wanting to commit to plans I don't really want to do, or plans that I'm not sure I'm going to really want to do in the future. It can all happen inside a relationship, right? So then the fault finding ultimately comes down to this, like, looking for problems. Yeah, dismissing and dismantling women and partners as being too much, too needy, not attractive enough, not fun enough, not ambitious enough. Even down to really silly things like how someone talks and the sound, like what people wear, like all these kind of more picnickety things, like say, for instance, what someone's feet looks like, right? I've heard that from clients before, or wrinkles, or bags under the eyes, or using Botox or not using Botox, whatever it can be, right? Because ultimately those are the things that happen there. So where does this come from? This is like the immature masculine, right? When it comes down to this criticism, not being able to just be with, right? It's like looking for problems, even to a certain degree, sometimes looking for things to fix. This can look like, but it's looking for problems, looking negatively. Yeah. Not having this kind of mental awareness, this present awareness of what's there. So then there's the next one is, I got my list here, is, this rejection sensitivity. And this one doesn't always show up when it comes to, it's not always obvious with avoidant men that they're really sensitive to rejection, because they often come across as very confident. Like people will think I'm very confident. Even the other day, someone said to me, I was on a talk, I was doing a circle for a company that I work with, and the woman was like, "You're very confident." And I said, well, underneath that, I might not be, I'm actually quite sensitive to rejection, something I've had to really work on. But this rejection sensitivity, because what it causes in avoidant men is it actually is also rooted to this not opening up, expressing emotions, because they're not wanting to have their feelings rejected, right? So it's like, if I don't open up, you can't reject my feelings. If you listen to this as well, I was talking about Love is Blind on Instagram. I'm watching this series, me and Orsa are, and there's a woman in there, Sophie, and she's clearly avoidant. And she's like the high achieving type of avoidance, lots of accolades, lots of success in life and work, but can't open up emotionally, opens up very slowly. And there's a scene where she finds out that the guy she's talking to, Kieran, is talking to another woman. And she kind of has a conversation with Kieran. Well, I wouldn't call it a conversation. She kind of talks at him. And she creates the story of being rejected, right? She creates a story of her being his plan B, of being second fiddle and blah, blah, blah. But she creates that story because she's so sensitive to rejection. She's so afraid of being rejected. She creates the rejection. First, she created the rejection by not opening up. And then secondly, she creates rejection in her own mind by assuming what's happening is a thing she deeply fears, right? So avoidant people, avoidant men, have this deep rejection sensitivity. It often comes in the guise of like not really approaching women, not going after the women they actually really desire and want. It can be not opening up to their emotions. It can be not sharing, sharing details about their life and so forth. So how does that tally with the kind of masculine and feminine, right? To me, this is a lack of resilience, emotional resilience. And you could put this in either bucket of this like openness, right? There's an openness to rejection in the kind of mature feminine. And then there's also the aspect of like resilience that you kind of get in the kind of mature, the healthy masculine. So there's this like immaturity in both those areas that affect this kind of rejection sensitivity, right? Always be looking for, evidence, right? And it's also to do with like how the mind is overthinking as well, which is definitely sits in the area of the kind of immature masculine, right? Of this story making in the mind. And then the next one I got here, like signs, right, of avoidance is a lack of leadership in relationship. I talk to so many guys and all of them say the same thing. When we talk about, relationships and they're in a relationship or they're starting one and they're dating, there's this sense of like, maybe at the beginning they started to organize things and make things happen. And then the leadership falls away because some of the things we said before, like the fear, the anxiety, the worry about judgment comes in. So they're not making choices of organizing dates and doing things because they're so afraid of the judgment. So the leadership starts to be abdicated, right? The leadership sits with, and it's called directional leadership, especially really sits in that masculine zone. So it's like this immature masculine of abdicating leadership, trying to get other people to lead, right? Or also in this is like when other people do lead is finding problems, right? Fault finding in that, right? So it comes in this immature masculine part because they're always leading with this confusion and unsureness because they're half in, half out. Yeah. And that's another aspect of the kind of immature masculine that comes into this in that it creates a lack of safety, right? For our feminine partners, for a woman. Because there's this all that in, out, not sure energy, which is very immature masculine, unhealthy masculine, right? It's very boy masculine energy because it's emotional activity, it's unsureness, it's not directional, it's like unclear. It creates a lack of safety, right? And then the next point I have, there's a lot of points here how this shows up, right? Of course, shallow intimacy. This is a really good point that I've come up with. Don't you love when you think you come up with a good point? This kind of shallow intimacy, often avoidant people, when they come on, they can actually be, feel quite strong, quite interested, but the intimacy is quite shallow. The sexual intimacy is quite shallow. The emotional intimacy is quite shallow, right? In that is very much about the body, two bodies being together. It can feel really good. But the problem is that there's a detachment often with avoidant men. Not all of them, but often the detachment, an emotional detachment in the sex. Sometimes even a physical detachment, right? Which sits in the immature masculine because it's detached, it's not present, it's not grounded, right? And it's another thing that creates a lack of safety. So if you're a man, you listen to this and your partner's like, I don't really feel like you're here. I don't feel really that safe with you. A lot of what she's saying to you comes from the things that I've just described, right? The emotional intimacy, the struggles with closeness, the hot and cold, the fault finding, sensitivity to rejection, and then the emotional reactivity as well that goes with those, and the lack of leadership. You are creating a relationship. You're creating the beginnings of a dating situation, right? The situation, make it sound like a situationship, but what do we call the dating piece? It's just the courtship. The courtship. You create a lack of safety because there's no solidity and consistency to your behavior. And that's a really, really important aspect, right? When we are kind of this avoidant, anxious dynamic, which often happens, this lack of stability, and I was doing like a little baby, right? I feel like Bebeto in 1994. For my older viewers and listeners, you're going to know what I meant by there, the celebration in the World Cup. But this, I've got my hands together for those of you just listening and not watching, is this lack of stability. It's like an unstable floor because there's no consistency. It's like her trying to walk on an unstable floor but things are always moving and changing. It creates a huge amount of instability, fear, worry, anxiety, and then you become on the receiving end of that fear, anxiety, right, and worry, and that's overwhelming emotionally for you as an avoidant man. But you're also party to creating it, right, or you have the power to change it. That's a really important thing, right? It's a really important aspect here. So what else is there to say about the kind of masculine feminine piece? The unhealthy masculine is guarded, armored, detached, emotionally shut down, right? Again, you can see that with the what I've described, right? That's something else that comes up. Emotionally distant, even controlling, right? And this is something avoidant men do, and I do. It's very unconscious in that we try and control the emotion in the relationship by removal of ourselves. We try and control the relationship through absence. Like, okay, things are moving too fast. I'm going to remove myself. Not always a conscious decision. Sometimes it's fear and worry, and it means you back away, but it's actually quite controlling behavior. Yeah. And obviously, you know, anxious people do their controlling through forcing emotional disclosure or forcing or fast tracking closeness. That's something that anxious people often do because they want to be as close as possible so they can feel safe, right? Emotionally safe. But this, how avoidants often control relationships and dating, is through their absence. And that could be absence of messages, like taking a long time to reply, not replying at all. It's all these subtle ways to control the emotional pipeline that's coming towards them so they're not overwhelmed, right? So this, if you're listening to this, dude, and this is you, I feel you, man. I'm compassionate to your situation because this is how I felt for many years, right? I'm not here attacking you. I'm just here with you in this. Then I guess another one is this addiction to independence, but I've talked about that as well. And I'm just looking at a little chart I have. I use, one of the things I use for this kind of masculine, feminine polarity, I love, you know, John Wynan's work. You know, I've had him on the podcast a while back. You can find that episode. Really good episode. Really good episode. I've listened to that myself a few times. I get so much from it. But I also love a little map from a guy called Elliot Saxby. He wrote a book called, it changed its name. It used to be Masculine and Feminine Polarity Work. And now it's called Inner Marriage, right? And he has a lovely kind of 4-quadrant chart that I highly recommend downloading to have an understanding. And I guess some of the other aspects of the unhealthy masculine that come through in avoidant men is sometimes it's arrogance, actually. Like, I know how, you know, and that comes in even in the criticism. You know, when we're critical of our partners or our dates, we're telling them how to do things. There's an arrogance that we know how, you know, there's overconfidence that can kind of come through. Another one is shaming, and that's the fault finding, but that happens often kind of mentally. We're mentally shaming them, right? And also shaming ourselves. As avoidant men, there's a lot of shame involved and a lot of shame directed at ourselves. So that's something to also pay attention to. And then this is a big one. This is the kind of suppression and domination of the feminine, right? And we do this to our own feminines, you know, the emotional aspects of ourselves. We try and suppress and push down and repress. And then we do that to the relationship, if it's developing, and our partners. We try and minimize their feelings and emotions and minimize the importance of the feelings and emotions in a relationship, right? These are all these kind of unhealthy masculine expressions. And then often there's a selfishness, which is unconscious, right? We're just thinking about ourselves. We're not being selfless. We're being selfish. We're thinking about ourselves and what we need. Disconnecting through intellect. So this is the overthinking piece that comes online. It comes online and we're trying to think everything through when actually there's another route that we need to take to actually create connection in a relationship. I meet a lot of avoidant men, and their struggle is with overthinking everything. Overthinking. That creates stress, that creates disconnection. And they overthink in the hope that they can come to a conclusion and work everything out. Fucking newsflash, boys. Overthinking very rarely solved any problems, especially emotional ones, right? Especially emotional ones. Our overthinking we do to avoid feeling. Yeah, and that's a little clue into the how to solve it, right? I wouldn't say there's competitive nature to this kind of, that's one of the kind of unhealthy masculine that comes through, competitive, judgmental, definitely, right? The judgment we place on other people, our partners, the women we date, the way we look for little problems unconsciously. There's a judgment in there, and there's a self-judgment. Because every avoidant man I know, when he messes up a relationship, it ends, he feels relief, the relationship passes a few months, and then suddenly there's this wave of like, oh shit, I fucked it up, it's all my fault. Self-judgment, self-berating, self-being. It's like getting the lashes out and beating yourself, right? So it's important to know this. And then one of the things here is also unconsciousness. Yeah, there's an unconsciousness to the behavior. The overthinking is unconscious. The pushing away is unconscious. These are the kind of hallmarks of the unhealthy masculine, right? So, I guess the other thing I think I didn't touch on is like around communication. Did I touch that? So my notes here. Communication. We don't communicate, right? And communication is in the realm of the feminine, right? Because it's expression. Can be non-linear. It can be fluid. It's energetic. It sits in the realm of the feminine. So our poor communication is this kind of unhealthy feminine. And I guess I could have talked about the unhealthy feminine. Maybe I'll touch on that actually now. The unhealthy feminine aspects outside of what I said before that the avoidant man embodies. There's like blaming, right? There's this blaming aspect, blaming partners always there for, yeah. Resentment as well, this resentfulness, blaming them. There's an overly emotional aspect to it, right? Of the unhealthy feminine in avoidant man, but it doesn't come out in the way that's external, like words and crying and weeping and like overreaction externally. Often, sometimes it comes out in anger, but usually it's internal. Big reactions to small things, disproportionate reactions to small things. This example very personal to my life. You meet a woman and she meets me. Hey, David, we've been on a few dates now. I'm just wondering like what you're looking for. Where would you like this to go? Really reasonable question after a few dates. Yeah, I didn't used to think this true. I would massively overreact, but overly emotionally internal, shut down, be really vague with my expression and answers, not really say anything, and project that she was trying to entrap me into a relationship. This is overly emotional. It's just not externally expressed. It's happening all inside me. I'm chaotic inside. Inside, I'm chaos. My mind is fucking fried. I'm trying to figure out the right thing to say and get it perfect, right? Another trait of the avoidant man, not wanting to hurt anybody. It's a very noble thing to do, but it creates dishonesty, right? Overly emotional, all happening inside. Yeah? And there's another one on here that I think is really relevant. It's around being the victim. Yeah. So often it was me. I was a victim of these women who were too much, too needy, too emotional, unreasonable. It was me. I was at the poor me. So often in my story. Only later on down the dating would I be like, oh, actually, this was me. Right? So we've really named the avoidance and how that overlaps with the kind of masculine and feminine principles and ideas. And if you come from the school of like John Wiley, it's a bit more simple. Masculine is presence and consciousness. Feminine is energy and love, right? And to be honest, these two frameworks aren't so different, right? They overlap really well. So what do you need to do? What do you need to change? Now, I would say, and this is where I'm going to do a shameless plug, because, we have to talk about the things we do and the changes we make. Like, like I said, the men that I've worked with, I see them getting into relationships. One of the guys from my program, Breaking the Chains of Avoidance, which is starting again in September on the 24th. So you can join. It's open to you worldwide. It's an online program, 12 weeks and live sessions every week. He sent me a message earlier this year saying he got into a relationship off the back of the program. Another man in that same program got into a relationship during the program. Another guy in that same program also met someone wonderful afterwards. The guys who just went through the program that just finished like about a month and a half ago, I'm reading the testimonials for them and they're like Their relationships feel stronger. They feel more capable of leadership. They feel more emotionally open. You know, they really see their patterns. They're being more compassionate. They're getting back into dating. Lots of great things that happen to these men, right? So if this is a program you're interested in, because everything I'm about to talk about here, we cover in depth, 2-3 hours of it, practices to really embed you in it, exercises to go and take out into the world. So it kind of doesn't just be this thing you learn and got the knowledge of, that you learn the principles and how you can apply those principles in life, in relationship, in dating, right? So if you're interested in that program, even a little bit, right? Because if you're listening to this, you should be interested in this program. I'd say it's the best program for avoidant men in the world, right? If you're interested, go down below and sign up, join the wait list, or just sign straight up. It's up to you. So what do you need to do? Avoidant man, you want to change. So some of this is like, you've got to step into, I was about to say, some of this is really practical stuff, right? Some of it's kind of energetic shifts, and some of it sits in between or in both places, because no energetic shift happens without practical action, right? I'm a big fan of practical action, but I also think there's an element of like mental fortitude, mental focus. You know, when people work with me, it's always about like, who do you want to be, and who are you? What are you choosing each day, and the moments in the day? Are you choosing to be your old avoidant self? So when your avoidance comes up, you're just like, this is who I am. I can't do anything. Or do you choose to be the man you want to be, this secure, open leader, masculine, feminine blend of a man, right? This integrated man. So the things you need to change, right? You need to start to work on self-awareness. There's a podcast I listen to, and I've looked this up. Various studies show people always think they're more self-aware than they are. 80% of the population believe they're more self-aware than they are. Part of self-awareness is, and we practice this inside the group as well, and it's practiced in many of the men's groups I've been in, it's all well and good you knowing yourself, right? But that's only half of the equation. The other half of the equation is how people perceive you. Because true self-awareness is understanding yourself, your own patterns, blah, 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 all that stuff. Self-awareness, understanding your patterns, understanding why, all that kind of jazz, but also having a deep understanding of how people perceive you and receive you. And this is probably part of the self-awareness that people get really, really fucking wrong, is they only have half the thing. They're like, I know myself, I'm self-aware, I'm really kind, I'm really generous, I'm really loving. And then the people that meet them and interact with them are like, this guy or this woman is a fucking idiot. They're difficult to be around. They're unreasonable. They're selfish, blah, blah, blah. But they never hear this information. If they do hear this information, they're like, these people don't know me. But that's actually really counterintuitive to success, not just in relationship, but in business and in life and career, right? So self-awareness is about knowing self, but also having an understanding of how people perceive you. And this can be daunting because it can feel like judgment. But this is where you spend time with people that you trust, that you've opened up to, who have your best interests at heart, and you can feel that and know that, and you get feedback from those people, right? This is where coaching is so powerful as like a one-to-one thing and even in group, because you spend this time with somebody, like someone I'm coaching, they spend time with me, I listen to them, I talk to them, and then I give them feedback. I reflect like, hey, do you see how you're being around this thing? And they're like, holy shit, you're right. I've never known this. And I'm like, yeah, because no one's ever been willing to tell you, because everyone in your life doesn't want to upset you. And I don't worry about upsetting you because I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you move forward, right? And this is one, and then this is a little slight tangent I'm going to take you on. This is where the rise of ChatGPT and ChatGPT therapy, and even ChatGPT like life advice is really dangerous, because ChatGPT is built to, I'm going to say this crudely, to suck your dick. It's built to validate you and tell you how great you are and how amazingly clever you are. And if there's anything I know annoys me the most about ChatGPT, is the way that when you give it an idea, they're like, oh my God, you're so smart. Amazing for coming up with this. And you're like, motherfucker, I'm just another dumb guy. Can't you challenge me more? But it doesn't. It doesn't challenge you enough, right? Unless you implore it to. And I think the problem is with ChatGPT as a tool for coaching and therapy is that it just wants you to, it wants you to feel that you're great. And there's a place for that, right? but ChatGPT is 90% that way. So my rant's over. Back to self-awareness. You've got to understand, you've got to catch yourself. Part of self-awareness, I think, is seeing the patterns. I don't think part of self-awareness is actually necessarily changing them. I guess it is if if you see it's harmful, how self-aware are you to keep doing something that's harmful to yourself and others? And that's a really good point. If you keep doing something that's harmful to you, what you desire to have, relationship, healthy, and you don't do anything about it, how self-aware really are you? Yeah? The next area you need to work on. Really is around communication. Communication. This is so important because relationships, I reckon, are about 80% communication. Actually, relationships, especially when you've been in for a while, is about 70% logistics. Where do you need to be? Where do I need to be? What am I doing? What are you doing? What are we doing together? And then when you have a child, it's like 99% logistics. Like, that's the truth. And if you can't express yourself and you can't communicate, right, quote unquote, you're fucked, right? Relationships will always be hard, but you can learn. This is the thing about communicating. You can really learn. Like, I was not a fantastic communicator, and I am so much better now with clarity, asking for what I need and want, saying what's on my mind, saying the uncomfortable thing. Because a lot of communication that destroys is the uncomfortable conversation, the conversation that you think is too difficult to have, right, with your partner, that you leave and avoid, and then you realize towards the end of the relationship, when you have the conversation, she's totally fine with it, and you've been worrying about it for the last 15 years or whatever it is, right? This is the kind of healthy feminine. The healthy feminine expresses, right? And then you can also argue the kind of healthy masculine, right, is able to discern as well, like, and deliver information in a way that's clear. There's a clarity in it in communication. There's the expressive part, which is like coming forward. There's the courage part as well, which is, the masculine being courageous. And then there's the more of the expression. And then there's also, the kind of containment of the clarity that we bring as well, this kind of masculine element. So this is like, there's so much elements to this when it comes down to it in communicating. And also delivering information with wisdom as well, right? Communicating. The next part is the emotional aspect, right? It's an emotional aspect that you need to shift and change in yourself, right? This emotional capacity, which is usually very small, you need to increase the capacity. So some of this is about healing. You've got to go back to some of these old wounds, and you might find that really uncomfortable, and it actually isn't as bad as you think. You've got to go back, and some of this can be inner child work, inner critic work. This can be meditations and breath works, and some of it's somatic. A lot of it is somatic. These practices, going back to these feelings and these times in life and looking at them from a different perspective, because a lot of the time, the story we have about emotions and feelings is not really the truth. Give me an example. When I look back at my past, I have this instance of my dad shouting at me when I was reading to him when I was like 5. And for years, I felt quite angry about this. And I was working with a therapist, and he said to me, what else could have happened? And I remember being like, motherfucker, that's what happened. But he was like, what else could have happened? And I said, maybe I think he was angrier than he was because of how I saw him later on. And he's like, so it's possible that maybe he wasn't that angry at that time, but through the years, the way you viewed it is that he's really angry. Yeah. And this is kind of one of the kind of core wounds I experienced of like not being good enough. Right. Or, there are times when I tried to express what I needed and wanted and felt very shut down. Right. And that taught me my emotions, feelings, and needs aren't important. Right. So sometimes we have to look back at these old events, and we don't have to just look at them. We don't just talk about them like I've talked about here. This was like taking people back in a particular way and shifting that. So some of that is that emotional work. And some of the emotional work is learning to be with emotion. Like one of the emotional things, I wish one of the workshops I like to run is I like to get like 5 men, 5 women. And then I'd like the women to all cry and the men just to sit in front of them, like grounded, open, welcoming of the tears. Because that will change the men's lives, and it change the women's lives as well. If the man can just sit there and be with it, it will change both their lives. And I've seen this happen in workshops where the tears are of joy, of love, and the man just sits there and he doesn't project onto like he's done something wrong. He just sits with like, this is an expression. It's totally okay. And I'm open to it. I'm a yes to it. This kind of sacred masculine idea of being a yes to life. And that would be life-changing for you, right? Because what I've seen in our couples work and also men individually, being able to be with our partner's emotions and sit with them gives us the capacity to be with our own. And this is something we practice inside the program, inside of breaking the chains of avoidance, teaching them how to be with emotion, because it literally shifts relationships drastically because you become less reactive, right? And you've talked about reactivity being an internal thing and also an external thing. And it shifts you out of reactivity, which is like a trigger. I've been triggered by her tears. I've done something wrong. I'm a fuck up in some way. I want to hide and retreat, which means your emotions have taken over you, experience, versus this grounded man who's like, oh, she's crying. I feel like I've done something wrong. But there's a higher self I'm going to contact here and know that that's just a wound I have, and I'm going to stay present to her and her experience. And that's a whole different ball game to operate at as a man. And when you operate from that level of that kind of really healthy masculine groundedness, women feel it. Women are like gravitate and magnetized by it. The next point is going to be about leadership. As I said, a lot of men, avoidant men, they lack this leadership in love. They might be absolute fucking rock star leaders in their businesses and so forth, very directional, very high flying. Like I said, a lot of my clients fall under this kind of bracket of man. But in their relationship, they lack leadership. Too much second guessing, overwhelmed by emotions I talked about before. So they don't make decisions and choices. They don't move things forward, or they can be slightly reactive in their leadership, right? Very sensitive to their partner saying they're doing something wrong or they could do something different. Not knowing how to actually bring a playfulness as well in those moments. Like playfulness, often something lacking in a lot of avoidant men in relationship. They lack this leadership, this masculine leadership, and you call feminine leadership, if you want to, this more feeling leadership, more creative leadership, but more masculine leadership, which is about self-awareness, being aware of self, also aware of the people you're leading, that external awareness, like, I'm leading my relationship with Orsa. She really loves foot rubs and swimming. I'm going to arrange a weekend for us. So what we're going to do is going to go to a spa. She's going to go to the swimming pool. I'm going to go to the gym. She loves to sleep in the afternoon, so I'm going to go for a run. Like you're creating, leading something that benefits both human beings and the relationship as well. This sort of leadership and moving forward, creating plans, dates, but being connected to what you desire and what she desires. So that might be like, you're dating. Oh, she says she really loves bingo. I don't know why I've said bingo. If you're in the United States, you won't even know what that is, and I'm not going to explain. It's usually something that old people do. My nan loves it, and she's 90. Bingo. So you're like, okay, I know this really cool, hip bingo place. Lovely cocktails and bar. Fantastic. I'm going to go there for the day. She's going to get them like, oh my God, bingo. I love bingo. You read my profile. Fucking leadership. Right? That's sexy. You've paid attention, awareness. You've listened. You've taken action. These are the things that women love, right? Because they feel safe. There's consistency, right? You're paying attention to the small details. If this is something I'm excellent at, paying attention to small details. If you pay attention to small details, women will trust you more because you're more aware. You're more socially aware. Most men aren't. They barely pay attention to the small details in their own home or in their room or their clothes, right? So, leadership. Next one, capacity for intimacy. Now, this is a kind of, pleasure, right? If we're talking about sexual intimacy, pleasure. And then we can also talk about intimacy from a point of leadership as well, like creating the structure, the safety in a relationship for intimacy to thrive, right? And then there's also the aspect of emotional intimacy, right? Which is an emotional piece, which is that healthy feminine, right? But it also has the kind of boundaries and structure of the healthy masculine. So you can see that this is a real polarity piece in every man, right? Because there's having deeper conversations, there's opening up emotionally, there's sharing yourself, your story, your pain, whatever it may be, your joy, your dreams, your vision, and holding space for, both of you. And then there's also leading in pleasure, right? Leading in depth of experience, physical experience that you can bring. And a lot of avoidant men really struggle with this, right? So we talked about intimacy. The next is a rejection, right? Because this is a really central piece to the avoidant man, right? Rejection, judgment, ultimately underneath those things is this feeling of not good enoughness, right? That's really what it is. I'm not good enough, so I'm going to be rejected. I'm not good enough, so people are going to judge me, right? So this kind of sensitivity to rejection, this is about resilience, right? This is a building up ourselves, our inner strength, our inner kind of inner strength, inner belief, inner confidence, so that we can tackle life and that we realize that other people's judgments don't mean anything. But also there's a mental fortitude, right? There's a mental aspect, there's a mental strength to this, which is really connected to the kind of judgment and being like, oh, other people's judgment of me doesn't mean anything about me, right? And I know that might kind of fly in the face of what I said about self-awareness, but like the projected judgments we think people are going to have about us, right? That's just in our projection. So there's a mental fortitude of like not going and giving energy and power to that constantly. Right, so there's a lot in there, right, that you can do. And I could keep on going, right? There's one aspect in there that I kind of didn't say, what I'm going to say now is like, there's a worship of the feminine. So like an adoration, a worshipping of the feminine, both our inner feminine, our own feminine nature, feelings, emotions, so forth, and the feminine, our partner. So that'd be like loving the emotions and feelings, the wild expression, the creativity, you know, all the things that we may suppress, the diversity, the empathy, right? Is like adoring that in ourselves so that we can amplify that, and adoring that in our partners as well, right? So that we're not trying to suppress, we're actually lifting up, encouraging, right? And I know you might hear that and go, if I encourage her to be more emotional, then it's just going to be really crazy and chaotic. But the reason why it feels crazy and chaotic is because your emotional capacity is really small, because you've been suppressing your feminine unconsciously and consciously all these years. Once yours grows, you just have more capacity for it. You know, it's like just, you know, you swapping out a small bucket that can only take like 2 drops of water into a 20-litre bucket. It's a different ball game you're playing at. Those two drops are like, oh, why not? I can take a couple of litres and I'm good, right? And there's also the growing in empathy. You know, this is an emotional piece, but empathy is a really important thing for avoidant men, both for themselves and for others. Being in space where you can generate that empathy is vital, really, really vital, right? Self-trust, another one. As you see, you know, just let things come sometimes. Self-trust. Avoidant men don't trust themselves, right? So common. A lot of people, insecure attachment is really linked to self-trust. Growing in your self-trust through trusting your decisions and choices, especially in a relational space, right? Is allowing yourself to make mistakes, yeah? Allowing yourself to fail at these things. Because through that is where you find success. So we've gone over a lot, right? So, and I guess what to say is, to start closing, wrapping up, is like, when you restore this kind of inner polarity and outer polarity, yeah, balance of the masculine and feminine, and that's not balance, harmony, you know, whatever that looks like, or range is a better term, being able to be really, you know, really like a rock when you're holding space for your partner and not reacting to your emotions, but also being able to then cry the day that your baby is born, yeah, or feel really passionate about something, a topic, or be able to really hold good boundaries in your life, or to be able to say, discern between what's right and wrong morally for you in your life, right? Or the right, not the right, but the appropriate action in any moment, and to be interdependent, right? Interdependence is the higher level of dependence. Independent, interdependent means that that's how you build great businesses and relationships. When you allow your partner and yourself to be dependent upon each other, interdependence, right, to some degree, and also interdependent on other people. That's how you create great relationships. And the way you have to actually start to trust people, that they'll be there, right? Because they do want to be there for you, and not projecting this lack of trust constantly, because that's one of the things we do as avoidant men. So to create this kind of success in dating and relationships, What's needed is this kind of healthy internal polarity, as I've talked about, and external polarity, right? That's what creates attraction. That's what creates a stable relationship that feels safe, right? That feels consistent, because you start to become someone who can be relied upon, who opens up, who doesn't shut down, who doesn't avoid talking about things, right? Leaving someone completely second guessing. You might be really clear, like, hey, I'm feeling something right now, but I don't want to talk about it right now. That is clear communication. You don't have to spill your guts every. You might have to be like, I'm just not ready to talk about this thing. I need a day. I need a couple of hours, right? Disappearing for a week or two isn't healthy, right? You know, a few hours up to 24 hours, depending on how important it is perfectly reasonable. And it's a clear communication. That's often what we lack when it comes to wanting space and wanting time as avoidance. We don't communicate. We don't say, hey, I just need a bit of time, because we're so afraid that they're going to say no, or they're going to reject it, or they're going to, you know, push our boundary, which they might do. But you also then get the opportunity to say, hey, I just need some time to think about this thing that you've just told me, because it's the first time I'm hearing it, for example. You've been thinking about this for weeks. So give me a few hours and be clear. Masculine energy, clarity. I'm going to come back in 3 hours and I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to go for a walk in the forest and feel the energy of the forest and see what that tells me, and then come back and have this conversation. And we can do this from a place where we're both grounded and calm and relaxed. Yeah. And just know that I love you and I want to do whatever I can to make this relationship work. Create some reassurance. Yeah. And then the payoff ultimately of doing this integrated work is happy, healthy relationships, right? Fun dating lives that aren't full of like fear and worry and anxiety, right? So in closing, this little summary, what did we talk about? We talked about the traits. We talked about what avoidance is. We talked about the traits and how it's really rooted in some, you know, emotional shutdown, lack of emotional ability, lack of leadership, a lack of kind of mental clarity and so forth, right? And we talked about how that's related to the masculine and feminine, the unhealthy masculine, unhealthy feminine inside of relationships, inside the avoidant person themselves, and how they express that. And then we talked about what we can do, right? Embody leadership, grow in self-awareness, learn to communicate better, learn to feel more deeply and express, growing the capacity for intimacy, shifting how we relate to rejection, and how we are interdependence as well. So there's a lot there. And like I said, it's a lot there. And it's one of those things, you'll hear all this and go, okay, I can do this on my own. You don't do this on your own, because that's part of the avoidant trap, is they want to do everything. We want to do everything on our own because we want to try and avoid any judgment or rejection. And actually that's the thing that keeps us stuck in our growth, right? Because we try and do it on our own through books and podcasts and all this stuff. And actually we don't take any action, and we don't take any accountable action from someone or some people who can go, hey, you said this thing last week and you didn't do it. What's happening there? They support you in getting there. And this is why I built, you know, Breaking the Chains of Avoidance. And I've seen it really help men in so many aspects of their lives, not just relationships, business, work, self-confidence, and so forth. So starts on 24th of September for 12 weeks. It's every Wednesday. Everything's recorded. Guys usually tune in from the States, Canada, Europe, the UK, Ireland. So if this is something you're interested in, you can feel that this is something you need, go down below and join the wait list. Go down below, sign up, or even go down below and just send me an email to have a conversation about it. And as I always say, ciao, ciao.